Welcome to this week's episode of the Muse Report. This week's guest was born and raised in Canada. She grew up with a diverse background in which she communicated with all types of people and continued throughout her professional and adult life, and that diverse background has helped her definitely. Her name is Lisa Brown Alexander. She is the CEO of Nonprofit HR and the author of the book Strong on the Outside, Dying on the Inside, which we talk about a little bit in the podcast. She shares with us the chronicle of her life, including life adjustments, overcoming depression, which we also talk about, and her overall success story. So in our discussion, we talk on multiple topics, including the importance of diversity, how nonprofits operate, what it means to be a mentor, identifying your strengths, and many more in between. So we got lots to talk about in this episode. I promise you will not be disappointed with this one. Lots of good nuggets of information that I know you will like and enjoy. And as I always say before we start the episode, if you have not subscribed, go subscribe. Just click the purple whatever color button it is on your phone, your device, your laptop, whatever you're listening on, so that you can be notified whenever I drop a new episode. You won't have to look and pull up my name on whatever you're listening on. And also, if you want to stay updated on all things the Muse Report and Muse, follow us on Instagram. The @ name is muse.mentality. That's MUSE.MENTLITY. Making sure you guys know how to spell mentality. And you can follow us on Facebook if Instagram isn't your thing. You know, if you're a Facebook person, you could follow our Facebook page under the Muse Report podcast. And also, if you're on your app on your phone or on your computer listening to this podcast, even if you've enjoyed this intro, leave a review and a rating. Reviews and ratings will help me and the Muse Report podcast to get on the rankings, because with more interaction, the more people can see what's going on, what we're doing here. If you support anything that we're doing on the Muse Report podcast, if you're learning something, if you enjoy listening, leave a review, give me some feedback, and leave a rating on there as well. So without further ado, we are going to get into this episode and sit down with Miss Lisa Brown Alexander. Here we go. Your professional career, I guess we'll just start with where are you from, and growing up and things like that. So
sure. So I was born in Canada.
Oh,
I was raised. Yeah, you didn't know that,
no.
Huh? Yeah, I was born in Canada in Montreal, and spent most of my young adult life, or my childhood and teenage years, in Canada. I moved here to the U.S. when I was 20 years old.
Oh, wow. So you're like Canadian.
Yeah, I'm really Canadian.
You're really
right?
Canadian. Okay.
Yeah, I'm really Canadian. So I moved here when I was 20 to attend Howard University, where I went to school. And then I just never left. I really liked it here. I developed friendships and relationships and decided to stay. And so I've been here ever since. And I will be here 29 years this year, 30 next year.
Wow. Okay. So what was growing up in Canada like? Because I have a few friends from Canada, and I've never been. I want to go, and I've heard Montreal is really beautiful.
Montreal is very beautiful, and most people here don't realize how beautiful Montreal is because they've not crossed the border.
Right.
But Montreal, where I was born, is very different than Toronto, where I grew up as a teenager. So Montreal has much more of an European influence.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. Yeah.
Absolutely bilingual, and some would argue it's more French than it is English, but it is officially bilingual. It's beautiful. It also is an old city, so it has some historical references that date back to the 16 and 1700s. It's a beautiful, beautiful port city. It's also very cold because it's on the river. Oh. Montreal is an island. It's a large island, but it's an island surrounded by water. And then the suburbs, you cross a bridge or drive on a highway to get to the suburbs. So that beautiful city, great city. Toronto, where I grew up as a teenager, is a big metropolis, much like San Francisco or New York. Has a big city feel, super multicultural. Not that Montreal isn't, it is very multicultural as well, but Toronto even more so. And that's a predominantly English city. Although I would say there are probably hundreds of languages spoken in Toronto. So I had a dynamic childhood, very diverse and eclectic background. I went to high school with kids from all over around the world. And so my view on multiculturalism and plurality and is just very different than the way a lot of people grow up here.
Do you speak French?
I used to. My French is not so great anymore. I can un petit peu, can get away with a few words, but not so great anymore.
Okay, so did you go to a special high school, or was it just the normal?
Just regular high school, public high school.
America is not.
we had very diverse. So I guess here, trying to think of a comparison in high school. I didn't go to high school here, so maybe that's not a good one. But every year in my high school, we had a multicultural day. And it was like a high holy day at my school. Wow. And everyone who came from everywhere, they wore their, native clothing, and we had food, and it was dynamic, and it was a really proud day for people, but it was competitive in a fun way, but it was, Toronto was very accepting of people being from elsewhere. Everyone was from somewhere else. Yeah. Even people who were Canadian born, they didn't have to go back too many generations to identify that they may have come from Scotland or Ireland or England or India or Bangladesh or Ghana or Jamaica. A lot of West Indians and people from Africa live in Toronto.
I need to make my way up to
love it.
To Canada.
You'd love it.
Okay, so grow up in Canada, high school, and then you decide to go to Howard in Washington, D.C. So how did that transition go, and what made you pick Howard and move to the U.S.?
So I wanted an HBCU experience. Okay. I was, as a young person, pretty avid reader, and I spent a lot of my teenage years reading books by Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and just all of the major kind of Black titles and about history, and I was fascinated by the concept of an HBCU and decided that I wanted to attend one. So Howard was my pick. My father immigrated from Canada to the U.S., and that was one of the reasons I also wanted to be here, to live close to him and attend Howard. That was a great experience, but an eye-opening one. So when you go to Howard, everyone assumes you're from the United States. And I wasn't. And there were a lot of little things that I didn't understand. So my first semester or two, I felt like a fish out of water because I didn't understand the language, didn't understand some of the slang and colloquialisms and food and just traditions and culture that people assumed I would know. So people initially thought I was from California because California students at Howard always got, teased for being different.
West Coast is different.
Yeah, West Coast is definitely different. And I was lumped into that category. And then eventually I found a community of Caribbean students on campus, which was very affirming for me. And I felt much more comfortable once I found my own social circle. I was fascinated by the concept of a fraternity and a sorority. I didn't really understand that until I got to campus and saw people pledging and walking through campus in uniforms and marching behind each other. And I'm like, what on earth is that? So I had no inclination toward a sorority at all. But I found the whole thing fascinating. I remember it was probably my first or second year at Howard going to a Nation of Islam rally. And that was something I'd always read about, but having the chance to actually go to one was like life-changing. It was at RFK Stadium. No. It was at the DC Armory. Okay. And this was probably in 1989, maybe 1990. And I was just fascinated. The beauty and the splendor and the pageantry of their their clothing and the fervor and the power behind the speeches and the pride in being Black was just, my mouth was hanging open. It was just amazing. And so those were some of the experiences I had in my initial years. And then as time went on, I really began to adapt to my environment and get used to the culture and learn about the food and the sayings and the slang. And I joined the Howard Gospel Choir, which was a really important part of my experience at Howard, and really was life-changing too. I would say two pivotal points in my time at Howard. One, when I found a community of Caribbean students, and then secondly, when I found Howard Gospel Choir, which to this day I have many close friends from that aggregation, and it absolutely transformed my experience.
So did your fascination with Malcolm X kind of go with the whole HBCU and the Nation of Islam thing? I could see how that kind of just came together.
It did. Yeah. I was fascinated by it. And I was drawn to messages around empowerment and buying Black, spending Black, kind of Spike Lee was at his peak then, and all his movies were out. And there was just an awareness and a pride in that I found just fascinating.
So I find that interesting, saying from your multicultural background and wanting to go to a HBCU. I mean, I see it the other way around too a lot. I mean, someone goes or surrounded by the same people their whole life. They say, I want diversity or something like that. So they go somewhere where it's diverse. Yeah. So I want to kind of just try to understand, well, why? Why did you want to go to a HBCU? And if you don't know what a HBCU is, it's for historically Black college and university. So why did you want to surround yourself with that environment?
I think I was more fascinated with it than anything. Yes, I lived. So I have, I think, mastered plurality culturally, right? Mm-hmm. I was born in Montreal, lived in an all-white neighborhood. We were the only Black family on our street. But went to church at a Black church, went to high school in a very multicultural setting. Around the age of 14, started reading a lot of Black literature. And so I think my life has weaved through a multitude of cultures. Mm-hmm. But I found myself in my young adult life really gravitating toward kind of the Black power movement. Mm-hmm. And so that was a large part of why I wanted to go to Howard. I wanted to be at a college where everyone looked like me and was pursuing higher education. And it just seemed to make sense, even though I came from a very multicultural experience. So, yeah, it's a little bit, I guess, conflicting, but complementary at the same time.
It makes sense to me. I mean, I just always find that you kind of want a different experience than what you're used to when you're moving on to that next phase of your life. With me, I mean, I've had a pretty multicultural background as well, but I've also been involved in all Black settings or even all white settings or things like that. So, I mean, lots of my friends, I went to one of the few, maybe out of two in the country, historically Black boarding academies. So, going there, lots of students were like, no, I don't want to go to HBCU. I've been around you guys my whole life. I want to get diversity. And I was like, man, I mean, I don't really mind it because I kind of already had it. So it wasn't like a huge deal to me. I knew I would get it when I graduated from college anyway. So I just always find that interesting how people operate in that dynamic and how they want to explore things.
I love it. I love the journey that I've had so far. The fact that I've been able to live and function and be comfortable in multitudes of environments, mm-hmm. right? So it's been good. I'm very comfortable in an all-white setting. I'm very comfortable in a super diverse, multicultural, multilingual setting. I'm also very comfortable in an all-Black setting. So it's there are very few places I will go at this stage of my life and feel uncomfortable. There are a few, though. In my career, being in the Deep South on business travel by myself and having to walk the streets of Montgomery, Alabama mm-hmm. at night wasn't so comfortable for me.
Yeah. Okay. We probably want to get to that, too, a little bit before we're done. But we're at Howard. You're at Howard. What made you decide the track that you went on? You studied business management. What made you decide that major? Did you come in saying, I want to be a CEO, I want to have a company, I want to do that? Or was it, this looks like it might be cool.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Yeah. It wasn't that at all. No, I've always been business oriented, even as a teenager. My sisters will joke with me, I had a desk in my room when I was like 12. So I've always been business oriented. So my first job was as a secretary in a very large bank in Toronto. And I knew pretty early in my career that I wanted to be in the business space. Didn't know I wanted to be a CEO, but certainly knew I wanted to be in business. And so it wasn't a question of, do I want to be a communications major or maybe psychology or, down in the valley at Howard in the sciences? Absolutely not. I was a horrible science student, and even economics was not a strength of mine, but business, absolutely. I was very comfortable with that.
So going through school, how was school for you? Were you a great student, average, or did you excel in one place and not so much in the other?
Yes, that was it. I excelled in my business classes and history, political science. Those courses did very well. I absolutely tanked on economics and my science courses. I remember being in the 8th grade and they were dissecting a frog and I was just like grossed out.
No,
so I couldn't do it. Yeah, I couldn't do it. So even in college, it didn't go so well, but I did enough to get by. But no, business courses were my sweet spot. And my history courses. I loved, African American history, African history. And those are courses you get at Howard that sometimes you can't get other places, or at least back then.
Right.
Now you can go anywhere and get anything. But back then, you couldn't go to a predominantly white institution and take, African American history. That wasn't happening so much back then.
So we graduate from Howard, I'm assuming with a degree in business management. Where did you go from there? Did you have a job straight out of college, or you were like, oh man, it's here, what do I do?
Yeah, no, I wasn't kind of having the experience that a lot of young people have now.
Yeah.
I actually landed a great job with a large multinational consulting firm in their benefits department. So I worked in Canadian and international benefits. So my Canadian, kind of life kicked in and worked to my advantage there. And that was my entree into both the human resources field and the corporate world. I left there to work for a nonprofit and took a step down, actually. I was with the multinational firm for about 3 years and then took a step down to be an assistant at a nonprofit in human resources. And I did that because I wanted to get a holistic view of the function. And in my first job, I was a specialist. In the second job, I was a generalist, meaning I kind of touched multiple aspects of HR, which was an intentional decision on my part and a really good move for me because it allowed me to round out my professional experience. And then I left there and went to a for-profit entity, and then back to a nonprofit, and just kind of kept building my career from there.
So how did this association with nonprofit organizations, just because I keep hearing a lot, so like...
So it started with the first nonprofit I worked with, which was the National League of Cities. And that was really my entree and exposure into the nonprofit space, understanding that there are entire organizations that are committed to the betterment of people and societies. And I was very drawn to that. I think part of it came from my upbringing as a Canadian. So Canada is what people here call a democratic socialist country. And socialist has a negative connotation here, but it doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation in Canada. Where the government, in Canada, the government takes responsibility for its citizens in a different way than it does here in the U.S. And that has... very much influenced my perspective. So I was naturally drawn to the nonprofit sector because it was about leveling the playing field in many instances, or providing for those who were without. So the social fabric, the social safety net in Canada is much stronger than it is here. The taxes are higher too, but you just don't see some of the kinds of issues that you see here in the US.
Could you expound on that a little bit? Because, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but just a little, maybe some examples or...
Healthcare is the most predominant one, right? Yeah. So you can lose your house, you can lose your life savings here in the US if you don't have health insurance. In Canada, all citizens have health insurance automatically.
Right.
You don't hear, I never learned or heard of anyone losing their home or having to file bankruptcy because they didn't have health coverage. And you'd be surprised that what having health coverage can do for your life. It gives you access to care. It generally improves the health of a person and their outcomes, and right, their life outcomes. And so when you have that kind of safety net in place, it has the potential to eliminate some of the disparities in income and lifestyle that you may see here in the United States. It's just that's a really good example. The government in Canada does not see caring for its citizens as a handout.
Right.
It's something that you get here. That's called an entitlement. In Canada, it's called the right of citizenship. It's just a very different perspective. You see that in England as well, and other countries.
And I think it's just a chain effect, really. It carries over into other socioeconomic places within the country.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So, you're doing these jobs, you're moving around a little bit. When was the transition to when you went into your own company?
So, after my third nonprofit stint, so I left the National League of Cities, went back to corporate America for a hot second. And then I returned to the nonprofit sector and worked for the American Symphony Orchestra League, which is now known as the League of American Orchestras. I was their director of HR, so I was able to build my career by moving around. After I left the league, I went to work for a large trade association, also a nonprofit. And after that stint, so at that point I had 3 experiences in the nonprofit sector. And in each of those, it became apparent to me that nonprofits were an underserved market from a human resources perspective. So corporations could easily access outsourced human resources support, but nonprofits couldn't. And I said, why is that? Why is no one kind of going after this target market? Largely, I think, because at the time, and this is now in the mid-90s, there was a perception that there was no money to be made from working with or for nonprofits. Such a fallacy, such an untruth, such a myth. And so I said, you know what, I can absolutely do this. At that point, I had 12 or 13 years of experience under my belt as an HR professional. I kind of worked my way up the totem pole. And so by the time I left my last real paying job, I was the vice president of HR and took that experience to start nonprofit HR. And that was 18 and a half years ago. Okay,
so it means you had to fire people.
Yeah, sometimes hire, fire.
Oh man, I want to have my own company sometime in the future. I'm just like, man, firing people.
It can be difficult.
I feel like there's an art.
It is an art. There's part of it is a science. There's some things that you absolutely have to do every time to eliminate risk for the organization and to treat the person who's being impacted in a way that is caring and compassionate. But it's that is a combination of art and science. So yeah, I've grown used to doing it. I don't like it, but I know how to do it. And knock on wood, I've never worked with a client or worked with an employer who's been sued as a result of a termination.
That's good. Yeah. So transitioning, you have your own company now. What you saw the opportunity, the open market for it. Now, you said that it's a fallacy that there's not financial gain in this area.
Right.
I'm curious as to how the whole, because I've wondered this too. I'm like, okay, it's a nonprofit organization. Does that mean they're getting money from the government, or they're getting grants or things like that?
It depends.
And I'm just like, where does the resources come from? If they're outsourcing things, do they have to pay the people that they're outsourcing, right?
They absolutely do.
Can you enlighten me on how this whole thing
so
operates?
Nonprofits are businesses. They're entities that operate not for the profit of their shareholders, but for the benefit of society. Mm-hmm. That's the primary difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit. But nonprofits are very diverse. They range from organizations like Greenpeace and, Goodwill. Mm-hmm. Those are names that most people know, mm-hmm. and they're large nonprofits, very well known, to very small community-based organizations that are volunteer-led. Most nonprofits generate their income from a few sources: government grants, corporate funding, foundation funding. So the foundations give money to mm-hmm. a nonprofit to operate a particular type of program. Individual donors and major donors. So people who donate money and write checks to a nonprofit to help them with their programming. And then in some cases, they make their money from membership dues and conferences and knowledge and products and events. So it really depends on the type of nonprofit. But there are nonprofits right here in Washington that have $100 million operating budgets every year. Mm. Not all nonprofits are small, fledgling, writing on both sides of the paper, right. working out of a basement with like one light bulb, and it's really dire. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, the nonprofit sector represents the third largest employment sector in the country, behind wow. retail and manufacturing. And wow. most people don't know that. But it employs over 11% of the nation's workforce. It represents 5% of gross domestic product, or the GDP. So the nonprofit sector is large and robust and well-funded in some instances and not so well-funded in others. But there is absolute viability in supporting that sector and that segment of the economy.
So can a nonprofit organization sell anything, or is that
absolutely okay. Yeah. So when you if you walk into a Goodwill store, it's a perfect example, right? Goodwill receives donations, mm-hmm. and then they sell those donated items to generate revenue for their organization. So they're selling.
Okay.
What they cannot do is distribute the profits of the organization to individuals.
Right. Okay.
Right. So that's the primary difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit. In a for-profit, any difference between what's brought in and what's spent is redistributed to shareholders, right. mm-hmm. people who have little ownership mm-hmm. slices of the company. In a nonprofit, you can't do that. The money stays with the organization and typically is reinvested in programs and services.
Okay. All right. That helped me a lot. I feel like you just busted a lot of myths for a lot of people listening, because yeah. It's just something I always wondered. To say, yeah, I'm working for a nonprofit organization. I'm just like, well, or let me give the scenario. You have a corporate company, for profit, and then you have a job offer from a nonprofit. There could be the possibility that you could actually make more money working at the nonprofit.
Potentially, although not typically, unless it's a really large nonprofit right. compared to a very small for-profit.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C., nonprofits have to compete with government and the corporate sector, so they tend to pay very well in mm-hmm. this region. But if you're in like Bismarck or, I don't know, somewhere really remote, then chances are you may not earn as much as a corporate entity might pay you, but the work can be incredibly rewarding. So
the company that you run now, that's just a normal HR consulting company, right?
It is.
It's just you're serving the nonprofit.
That's exactly
sector.
Right. Nonprofit okay. HR is a for-profit entity privately held firm, and a for-profit, but we work exclusively with nonprofits. Okay. So we don't work with government, we don't work with IT or banking or any other industry, just the nonprofit sector. But our clients are very, very diverse. So, for example, Greenpeace is a client of ours, but we also work with faith-based organizations and arts and culture and organizations that are advocating for the environment, for child welfare, and that serve youth, like the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington. All of those are types of clients that we would work with.
Okay. What would you tell your 22-year-old self if you I guess knowing what you know now, and I guess 22-year around graduating from college or something close to that, in college, graduating from college, what would you tell that Lisa Morton?
What would I tell my 22-year-old self? I don't know that I would tell myself anything different than I told myself when I was actually 22. I was pretty fearless as a young person. I like to do what hadn't been done before. Mm-hmm. And what I would tell other 22-year-olds is study your craft. Be really good at what you decide to dedicate your time and energy toward. Master it. Learn everything there is to know about your profession or your area of passion, and do it well. I think that gets lost on a lot of people. One of the things I was very committed to, and a lot of this came from my upbringing and my parents kind of drilling into my head, if you do something, you have to do it really well. And so that was what I think really contributed to my career trajectory, is that when I got into a company, I made it my business to learn everything about it, mm-hmm. to do well at what I was assigned to do, to show up right and ready. Mm-hmm. And that made all the difference. And I find that a lot of young people are just overly casual in their approach to their work, whatever their work is, whatever their passion is. If you are into bungee jumping, mm-hmm. learn everything there is to know about bungee jumping and master it, and know who the players are. Go to the conferences, read the material, be an expert. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, opportunities will open for you.
The question that pops up in my head, because I feel a lot of people are into the go short and deep rather than long and shallow, mm-hmm. with as far as what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Master what that thing is, yeah. and then from there you can branch off and make That's sure right. you know that thing. Yeah. But I feel like a lot of young people, which I feel like is a good demographic of people who listen to the podcast, they might not know like what they want to do. Yeah. So, and especially for me as a person, I just, to a certain extent, I kind of hated it because, some people, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but like if you suck at a lot of stuff, you find what you're good at, you're going to stick with what you're good at. And you should do right. what is affirming, do what you have a passion for and what you are good at. Right. Because when you do what you're good at, it's not work. Yeah. It's joy. It's reward. It's empowering. Optimizing your strengths.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I know for me, and I came from a very pretty traditional household, and, go to school, get a job, don't ruffle feathers, do a good job and keep it moving. But for me, I wanted more than that. And mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted more than that. And I was very intentional and planful about making sure it happened.
So for me, it was hard because I was good at a lot of things. Like I was good at sports. I could talk. I mm-hmm. could write a little bit. And like I was pretty good at mm-hmm. things. So I didn't really know. I was like, okay. But I never thought I was exceptional at anything.
No.
I'm still trying to figure out, and I mean, as I go on, you know, sometimes people will tell you things that you didn't know about yourself. But just for how do you think someone should dabble in everything and then just
until they find something that
some
sticks.
type of osmosis happens where they find out, oh, that's it.
I mean,
or
when you're young, you can do that. I think there's a lot of benefit to focusing, but if you don't know what you want to do, then yes, experiment. Kind of, you know, spend some time in areas where you do have an interest, and get a mentor. Figure out who the players are in a particular space that you have an interest in, and get enough knowledge to make a determination about whether or not this is something you want to do, or you could see yourself doing, you know, Monday to Friday, 9 to 9. I'm not even gonna say 9 to 5, 9 to 9.
Yeah.
And if it's something that you think you could do, then dig deeper. If you get into it and you're like, not so much, then move on. The caution I have is the moving on for young people happens much faster than people my age.
Didn't work. Okay.
Yeah. Like, okay, 3 months later, I'm gone. Try something else. And you have to just watch that, right? You got to have a little stick-to-itiveness and be able to see something through and really decide whether or not it has the potential to be rewarding for you. You know, I'm a little challenged with relating to not knowing what to do because I was so clear about what I wanted to do. And I can't imagine. I think if I were graduating now, if I were in school now trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, there's so many more options and life is so different than it was 30 years ago. Yeah. And so I'm not sure what I would do. Although I'm inclined toward entrepreneurialism, and so I likely would have ended up in the same place I am now, because I like to chart my own course. I am driven by a blank slate, and creating my own space and rules, and that's where I thrive.
You made the point of finding a mentor, and I feel like it should be 1,000 times easier today with the amount of communication and resources we have, but I feel like some people still struggle with the fact of finding a mentor or someone in their space that they can ask for advice from. Or
it is hard. It is hard, particularly because people who serve as mentors are oftentimes very busy themselves, and so I think some of them have the best of intentions but don't have the time that some mentees are looking for. And so I'm very cautious about serving as a mentor. I have young people reach out to me on a fairly regular basis asking me to be a mentor, and I typically say no, because what I don't want to do is say yes and then be unavailable.
Right.
So it's not something I generally commit to doing. But for those people who are more seasoned in their careers who offer to do it, they really do need to be available. And they need to be able to provide advice and guidance on a consistent basis, because that's what young people are looking for, feedback and guidance. But if you can find a mentor, it's great, because it really can help give you perspective and insight into areas that you don't know anything about.
Would you recommend kind of going for a more seasoned professional rather than someone closer to your age? I mean, because I feel like if they're younger, they're really still in the hustle. They're still like in the grind, so they may not have as much time.
They may not, and they may not have as much life experience. There's a lot to be said for experience, and so I'm not going to say the older the better, but certainly someone who's been around the block a few times, who can help you avert career crises that a younger person may not be able to help you avert because they themselves haven't had enough experience. So, I would say someone who's been around for 20, 30 years, who's had some career experiences and made some mistakes along the way and can give you some insight is best.
Here's the kind of the question I have in my mind. We're in a time where cultures are kind of shifting as far as generations, and finding someone that you can look up to or get advice from, I feel like if you find someone, who's maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe, that have been around the block a long time, they have more time to spend with you, but you two might not be on the same page of what you envision, or even your point of view on business, or whatever that thing is. Maybe in the arts it might be a little bit different, because that doesn't really change.
Timeless, right?
It's timeless, right? But as far as something as business, or like pop culture, or things like that, those things are changing all the time. So
but a mentor is not just to someone you can relate to. It's someone to expose you to things you otherwise wouldn't know about. Right. So a mentor is not to just affirm, I like P. Diddy too. Like, that's great. But that's not what they're there for. A mentor is to expose you to things that you otherwise wouldn't know, to give you guidance about things that you have not yet experienced. So you do want a mentor that is a little bit different than you, that's going to break you out of your kind of comfort zone.
Your way of thinking, yeah.
Yeah, and to give you some perspective that might help you. Doesn't mean that they have to like everything that you like, or even understand, as you said, pop culture. But what they will know is how to show up, hopefully how to do things well, how to connect with other people from a professional standpoint, how to succeed. Those are things that are fairly timeless and universal as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I saw you on the news. I was saying this before, and I just saw like 30 seconds. I was like, wait, I know her. She's like Fish Favor. She's on TV.
No, not really.
So, can you just tell me what was happening? What your spot was?
So I'm not sure what you saw. I've been on television a few times, but
we'll see.
It may have been related either to my career as a CEO, or related to a book that I wrote. So I wrote a book, and several years ago. I was going to say the year, but I can't remember the year right now. But several years ago, I wrote a book called Strong on the Outside, Dying on the Inside. And it is a chronicle of actually my own life. And the struggle that I had with postpartum depression. So after the birth of my second son, I experienced depression, and it went untreated for about 5 years. At the same time I was living with that, my career soared. So I went from being a kind of an assistant to a manager to a director in 5 years, and things were just kind of jumping off career-wise. And I was doing very, very well, but I was also living with depression, and nobody knew it. And so that was likely what the interview was about.
Wow. So in the book, are you trying to relate to those who were going through the same thing that you were doing, giving them advice on how to work through that experience?
Yeah, indirectly. It was a story about my life, and it was I specifically was speaking to successful Black career women who are Christians, right? So that's an added dynamic. There is a burden that Black women have in general to be strong and to be able to hold up their families. So there's that dynamic. But when you're a Christian living with depression, there's an additional burden of looking like you have it all together, pray it away, it'll be fine. And sometimes we need more than prayer. We also need professional help. And so I spoke about that in the book, and just how I tried to hide my situation and the lack of freedom that I felt expressing myself because of my Christian background and upbringing. So it was a difficult time in my life, but one that I lived through and have overcome, and really wrote the book to help other women understand that they can as well.
We had a guest on who is a new psychologist. I think psychologist. And the title of the episode was Mental Health Matters. And
it does.
And it was a great episode. She talked about what she battled with depression and things like that, and anxiety. And she was giving some tips on, because the part that I feel like is so hard for many people is taking the stand to go find some help, that because especially in the church, or
Right.
if you have some type of religious background, it's like, okay, pray it away.
That's right.
Or either you're doing something wrong or something like that, where it's your fault. So what would be something that you would say to someone that could be battling something like that, as far as where do you go or who do you talk to start that overcoming process?
You first have to talk to yourself and tell yourself that you're worthy of being better and living in a more healthy way. And that's really hard when you're living with depression, because everything is dark. Allow people to help you when they're reaching out, because chances are the people around you are seeing, they may see some glimpses of it. And if they offer to help you, take that help, especially if you don't feel like you can help yourself. So take the help that's being offered to you. If you find yourself ready to accept help, then there are multiple sources where you can get assistance. You can check with a psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist is a medical doctor that treats mental health conditions, typically using prescriptions. You can go to a psychologist, who is typically a therapist and not a medical doctor, not able to prescribe medication, but usually uses strategies like talk therapy and other kinds of therapy. You can join support groups, like the National Association for Mental Illness. They have support groups all over the country, and they can connect you to resources in your own community. There are a lot of resources online as well that people can tap into. So there are a lot of resources. If you're ready to get the help, tell someone that what you're living with. Don't live in secret, which is what a lot of people do, particularly Black women, because they're afraid to disclose that they can't hold it all together, when so many people, family and society, expect us to do that.
Okay, imagine there's a scrapbook, and in each page of the scrapbook, before they pass away or something like that, you have something that you could put a saying for your page of the scrapbook of life, let's say. And each person on earth has a page in here, and they get to say something that the world gets to see. What would you put on your page?
That's an excellent question. In all the interviews I've done, I don't think anyone has asked me that. I would probably say, pursue what brings you passion. Live without fear. And be at peace. Those are probably the three things that have guided my life. Like I just, now that I'm where I am, particularly now where I am, I do not let people and circumstances dictate what I do. I'm very driven by the desire to accomplish things that others haven't done. And I'm fairly relentless in my pursuit of that. I'm also, now that I've overcome my depression, I'm vigilant about my mental health. And so I don't allow people or things to hold me down too long. I'm very vigilant about that. I if you're weighing me down, if you're bringing foolishness to my life, chop, chop. You get the chop. Yeah, I can't do it. Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Now you might have one of the quickest responses for that question. 'Cause
Is
most
that
people
right?
are like, oh man. Sometimes I have to edit it out because it's such a long
Oh,
pause.
is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, yeah, I'm pretty clear about that. I life without fear is the life best lived. Fear of failure, fear of people's opinions. I just really believe in living without fear.
That's good. That's about all I have for you. You did great. I could clearly tell that you've done this before.
I have. I've done this a few times. Yeah.
But thanks for being on the show.
No problem.
This is going to be a banger for sure.
Okay,
I know this is a good
you.
one. So
thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that good? She tore it up. She was so poised on the mic. I thought that was great. If anything, I enjoyed interviewing that as much as you did hearing it. Lisa Brown Alexander was great on the show. I hope you guys are learning something from these episodes, growing from them. I know I am. Every time I ask a question, I'm learning something new, and I hope that you are receiving the same benefit and ROI I am from doing these interviews and listening to this podcast. So give it a 2 thumbs up, some 5 stars on the ratings and reviews. Give me some feedback if you can. It really helps me out planning on how I'm going to do new episodes and what I need to do in the future to make this experience the best it can be for you. That's what I want to do. So once again, just hit us up on Instagram or Facebook. I am active in my DMs. You can send me a message if you want to, so you can see what's going on with the show, ask some questions, give some advice, whatever it is, a guest that you want to have on. But I am available to you because I want to keep growing and getting better as well. So thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the Muse Report. We will be back next week with another special guest that I will be introducing to you guys soon on my social media. So make sure you follow. And I will talk to you guys next week. Keep growing, keep being inspired, and keep turning your muse into a reality. I will see you guys next week.
Hey guys, Clee here. Thanks so much for listening to the Build Your Vision podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would think you did if you stayed all the way to the end. The best thing that you could do to help support this show is by sharing it with somebody. By you just taking a few seconds to recommend this show to somebody, you are making a huge impact, not only on the success of this show, but possibly on that person's life.